There's a moment, a quiet one. It doesn't come with fireworks, it doesn't come with drama, it comes in the silence of a room when a narcissist realizes they've lost someone they can't replace. You see, people who manipulate, who gaslight, who build their worth by breaking others down. They live in a fantasy where they are always the hero, always the victim, never the villain. But reality catches up, and the moment they lose someone powerful, someone kind, self-aware, resilient, someone who finally said, enough, is the moment that illusion shatters. They remember the support you gave, the times you stood by them when no one else would, the empathy they mistook for weakness, the loyalty they took for granted, the strength they only saw once it walked away. Because real power doesn't need to shout, it doesn't need revenge. Real power leaves with grace and builds something better, and that haunts them because now they know they didn't just lose a person. They lost the one person who truly saw them and still gave them a chance to grow, but they chose ego over empathy, control over connection, and now they're left with echoes of what they had and what they'll never have again. So if you've walked away from someone toxic, if you've chosen your peace over their chaos, remember this: that was your power, not in hurting them back, but in healing yourself forward. There's something fascinating about silence. We're conditioned to expect big turning points to come with noise, with arguments, with shouting, with a storm. But the truth is, the most powerful realizations often arrive in complete stillness, especially for narcissists. They live in a world crafted by illusions, a world where they are always the center, where every event, every emotion, every person is orbiting around them. They've rehearsed their story so many times in their minds that they believe it. They're the misunderstood genius, the victim of everyone else's failure to appreciate their greatness, and anyone who dares to challenge that narrative is dismissed, belittled, or pushed away. But something interesting happens when someone powerful finally walks away. Not with anger, not with a dramatic exit, just quietly. At first, the narcissist doesn't notice. They're used to people leaving and coming back, to arguments that end with apologies, usually not theirs, to making others feel so small that they question their decision to leave at all. That's the cycle, that's the game, but this time it's different. The silence lingers, no messages, no attempts to explain. No desperate calls or emotional breakdowns, just absence. And for the narcissist, that's where discomfort begins. Not because they miss the person, but because they miss the supply, the attention, the validation. The comfort of having someone who made them feel important, even when they didn't deserve it. In that silence, reality starts to creep in. Slowly, they begin to remember the presence you carried, the way you supported them, even when they were impossible to be around. The patience you had when they were distant, the encouragement you gave when they didn't even know how to receive it, the way you still believed in them, even when they gave you every reason not to, and then it hits them. You're not coming back. That quiet, powerful departure wasn't an emotional reaction. It was a decision, a boundary, a reclaiming of your self-worth. They start replaying moments in their head. Conversations where you tried to connect, where you tried to understand, where you gave them a chance to grow. And instead of rising to meet you, they chose to stay comfortable in control. They pushed you away, thinking you'd always return, thinking you needed them more than they needed you. But now they're faced with something they can't manipulate. Your absence. It's not angry, it's not loud, it's not part of the usual script, and that's what terrifies them. Because they can't fix it with charm or blame or guilt. They don't even know where to start. This is the moment they begin to feel what they never thought they would: regret. And not the kind that leads to real transformation, at least not immediately, but the kind that lingers in quiet moments, when they scroll through old photos, or pass places you went together, or hear your favorite song, and they realize the energy you brought into their life wasn't ordinary. It wasn't something they can replace with the next person who gives them attention, because it wasn't just your presence. It was your power, the power to love deeply, to forgive, to understand, the power to stand beside someone even when they were hard to stand beside. And now that power is gone. They lost it. And maybe the most humbling part of that realization is knowing it didn't take a fight. It didn't take a grand speech. It didn't take revenge. It just took silence. A silence that echoes louder than any words ever could. A silence that tells them, without saying a thing, that you've outgrown the game and you're not looking back. Narcissists are experts at reading the room, but not in the way that builds connection. They don't read to understand, they read to control, to measure who they can manipulate, who they can charm, and who will tolerate the weight of their ego. They're incredibly skilled at identifying kindness and mistaking it for weakness. They look at compassion and assume it comes from insecurity. They see patience and assume it's submission. But what they never seem to recognize, at least not until it's too late, is the quiet strength behind those traits. It's easy to underestimate someone who doesn't fight for attention. It's easy to look down on someone who chooses empathy over confrontation, to assume that just because someone doesn't retaliate, they're incapable of doing so. That just because someone forgives, they can be walked on. But that's a fundamental miscalculation, one narcissists make again and again. The person they try to control is often the one person in their life who has the deepest sense of self. Someone who doesn't need to dominate to feel secure. Someone who understands their own value, not because others validate it, but because it comes from within. And because they don't need to prove anything, they don't react to every provocation. They don't rise to every insult. They stay grounded, calm, and compose, even when the narcissist pushes every button they can find. But that calm presence, that's not weakness. That's discipline. That's emotional intelligence. That's power. The narcissist sees a person who keeps forgiving and assumes they're dependent. They don't see the internal battle that person has had to fight to stay true to themselves, to not become bitter, to not lash out, to not shrink. They don't realize that staying kind in the face of cruelty is a form of strength very few people are capable of. And because the narcissist is driven by ego, they can't understand that kind of power. It doesn't register in their value system. In their world, power is about being louder, being right, being in control. So they continue pushing, testing, gaslighting, manipulating, not because they're brave, but because they assume you won't leave. Because they believe you're too soft, too scared, or too attached to walk away. But there's always a line. And the person they're underestimating, the one they think they have wrapped around their finger, is often the one who is simply giving them a chance. A chance to grow, a chance to choose something better, a chance to change. That patience, that grace, it has an expiration date, and when it runs out, the narcissist is left stunned, not because the person walked away, but because they never saw it coming. They were so convinced they had control that they didn't realize they were standing on thin ice the whole time. That's the moment they begin to see the truth, that the strength they dismissed was never passive. It was active, it was intentional, it was measured, and most of all it was earned. Because it takes far more courage to walk away from someone you once cared for than it does to cling to them out of fear. When someone powerful walks away, it doesn't come from impulse. It comes from clarity, from having seen the patterns, having held space, and finally choosing self-respect over self-sacrifice and that choice. That quiet, firm, unshakable decision, that's what breaks the illusion for the narcissist. That's when they realize they were never in control. They only ever had the illusion of control, borrowed from someone else's patience. But now that patience is gone, and so is the person they underestimated, there's a moment, sometimes quiet, sometimes fierce, when a person finally chooses themselves. It doesn't always come with dramatic exits or grand speeches. Often, it comes after countless nights of overthinking, after too many conversations that felt one-sided, after forgiving the same behavior one too many times. It's not about anger, it's about exhaustion. It's about clarity, it's about realizing that your worth is no longer negotiable. When you walk away from a narcissist, it doesn't feel like winning, at least not at first. It feels like grieving. Because you didn't just lose a person, You lost the version of yourself that believed things could change if only you loved harder, communicated better, were just a little more patient. You mourned the hope. You mourned the time. You mourned the energy you invested into someone who saw you more as a reflection of their own needs than as a whole person. But that decision to walk away, that quiet step into your own freedom, it's one of the most powerful things you'll ever do. Because narcissists don't expect you to leave, not really. They expect you to stay, to doubt yourself, to keep second, guessing whether it was really that bad. They rely on your empathy to keep you tethered. They weaponize your loyalty, so when you finally say, "This isn't love," and you mean it, not with your words, but with your actions, that's a shift they don't know how to handle. You see, walking away isn't just a physical act. It's an emotional severing. It's saying, I refuse to shrink myself to be digestible for someone who was never hungry for anything real. And that takes courage, that takes strength, that takes self-respect. Because staying would be easier, familiar even, but you chose hard, you chose growth. You chose the uncomfortable path of healing over the familiar cycle of hurt. And the narcissist, well, they don't see it coming. Because to them, you were always going to be there. You were predictable in your compassion. They thought your forgiveness had no end, that your hope was permanent. They misunderstood the nature of your love. They saw it as something they could control. But your love was never the weakness. It was the proof of your strength. And walking away was the ultimate expression of that strength. Because let's be honest, walking away doesn't mean you stopped caring. It means you finally started caring about you, about your peace, about your mental clarity, about waking up in a world where you don't have to filter your thoughts or brace yourself for manipulation disguised as affection. It means you stopped romanticizing potential and started honoring reality. And the reality is, love shouldn't feel like survival. It shouldn't feel like performance. It shouldn't feel like sacrifice without reciprocity. What you did when you chose yourself was not selfish. It was necessary. It was the beginning of your return to self. The start of remembering who you were before someone else convinced you that your worth depended on how well you served their comfort. And while they may try to re-enter your life with apologies or guilt or promises they can't keep, you'll notice something different this time. You're no longer moved by their words, because you're no longer looking for them to fix the damage. You've stopped needing closure from them because you found it in your own decision to leave. They'll feel that emotional independence, that shift in energy, that confidence that says, I don't need you to be whole. And that's what breaks their illusion. That's what exposes the truth. They never had power over you. They only had access, and you were the one who gave it. But now you've reclaimed that access. You've recentered your own voice. You've chosen boundaries over chaos, truth over illusion, yourself over the lie that you were ever too much or not enough. You didn't just walk away, you walked back to yourself. There's something incredibly revealing about the aftermath, about who you become once the dust settles. Not the version of you that was trying to hold it all together, trying to make sense of chaos, trying to love someone who never learned to love back. But the version that emerges once you've stopped explaining, stopped fixing, stopped hoping they'll finally change. The version of you that begins to breathe again. That's when growth begins, quietly at first, almost unnoticeably. You don't wake up one day suddenly healed or fearless or free. But little by little, you reclaim the parts of yourself you forgot. You laugh again, not because something's funny, but because you feel light enough to. You make decisions without second, guessing how someone else might twist them. You start trusting your instincts again after months, or years, of being told you were too sensitive, too emotional, too much. It's easy to think of healing as a destination, as some place you arrive once the pain is gone. But it's not like that. Healing is a series of small, brave choices. Choosing to not respond to the message that used to trigger you. Choosing to speak kindly to yourself on the days when the past echoes a little louder. Choosing to believe that your future doesn't have to repeat what hurt you. Those choices stack up. And before you know it, you've built a new version of you. One rooted in self-awareness, not self-blame. The narcissist doesn't see this version of you coming because they were so focused on the old you, the one they could guilt, the one they could confuse, the one who would fold just to keep the peace. That's the version they remember. That's the one they'll try to reach when they come back. And they will come back, usually not because they miss you, but because they miss the power they felt being able to affect you. They come back expecting the same dance, the same dynamics, but you've changed, and that change terrifies them, because now you're no longer looking at them through the lens of hope. You're seeing them through the lens of truth. You've learned how to spot the pattern, you recognize the tactics, you see the manipulation not as love, but as a tool they use to keep you small. And when you can see clearly, you can choose differently. That's the moment they realize they don't have access anymore. Not just to your time or your energy, but to your mind, to your self-perception, to that inner dialogue they used to influence. You're no longer walking through life trying to earn someone's approval who was never capable of giving it in the first place. You're no longer measuring your worth by how much you can tolerate. You're living by a new standard now, one that says, I don't accept confusion where there should be clarity. I don't accept fear where there should be safety. I don't accept emotional games where there should be respect. That shift, it's more powerful than any confrontation. More impactful than any apology they could offer, because it means you didn't just leave them. You outgrew them. You evolved beyond the version of yourself they thought they could keep stuck. And growth like that can't be undone. It doesn't fit back into the box they kept you in. And here's the part that catches them off guard the most. You're not angry anymore. You're not trying to prove anything. You're not looking back to see if they notice. That calm, grounded version of you, that's what they never expected, because they relied on your emotional investment to keep you tangled. Now you've learned to invest in yourself, in your healing, in your peace. And that's what real growth looks like, not revenge, not proving you were right, but living in a way that makes the past irrelevant, not because it didn't happen, but because it no longer defines you. You didn't just move on, you rose above. There's a point in every story where the tables turn, not because someone loses control, but because someone else decides they don't need to be controlled anymore. That's the moment when power shifts. And in the case of a narcissist, it's when they realize they've lost their grip not on your time, not on your presence, but on your mind. That's when everything starts to unravel for them. Because narcissists don't just feed off attention or admiration. They feed off influence, the ability to shape how you see yourself, the power to make you question your memories, doubt your instincts, rewrite your truth just to suit their version of reality. And when they can no longer do that, when their voice is no longer louder than your own inner knowing, that's when the real loss hits them. You see, narcissists aren't afraid of losing you. They're afraid of losing the version of you that needed them. That version that kept shrinking to fit inside their comfort zone, the one that apologized first, the one that second, guessed their own boundaries. That's the person they were counting on you to be forever. But what they didn't expect was that one day, quietly and without asking for permission, you would stop looking to them for direction. You would stop giving them the benefit of the doubt. You would stop waiting for them to finally become the person they promised to be. And when you stop waiting, they lose control. Not because you've said something explosive, but because you've stopped giving weight to their words. They notice when you no longer flinch at their silence. When you don't panic after they pull away, when you don't chase them after they push you, that unnerves them because for so long, their behavior controlled your emotions, and now it doesn't. That's what real power looks like. Not loud, not vengeful, just free, free from the game, free from the cycle, free from believing that their opinion of you holds any real value. Because somewhere along the way, you realized their version of love came with too many strings. And you started cutting those strings one by one until nothing they did could move you anymore. What's so fascinating is how calm it all becomes, not because the past doesn't still sting, but because clarity has replaced chaos. And the moment you start seeing yourself clearly again, their voice starts to fade. They become smaller, not literally but in your world. The pedestal you once put them on disappears, and you realize they were never 10 feet tall. They just stood taller when you knelt. Now you're standing, not with bitterness but with truth. You've reclaimed the narrative. You no longer need them to understand your side of the story. You no longer seek their approval to feel whole. And that shift, that internal, unshakable self-belief, is what makes them realize they've lost someone powerful, because you were never just supply. You were never just another person in their orbit. You were the one who brought depth. The one who brought emotional safety, the one who gave them more chances than they deserved, and now that you're gone, not physically, but mentally, emotionally, energetically, they're left with a hollow echo of what used to be. They try to replicate it, but they can't, because it was never just about attention, it was about your presence, grounded, loving, forgiving, and when they finally understand what they lost, it's too late. Not because you hate them, but because you've outgrown the need for them, and that, more than anything, is what shatters their illusion of control. You're no longer triggered by their silence, you're at peace with your boundaries. You trust your gut again. You wake up without the weight of needing to fix what was never yours to carry. That's not just healing, that's power. And they'll feel the loss of that power every time they remember the one person they couldn't manipulate, couldn't diminish, couldn't keep down. You didn't just walk away from them. You walked fully into yourself.